Okay, it's 110. I'm just gonna go. Alright, this is my postmortem for a little game I made called Monstertron 8024. I just made it as a hobby. I am not a professional game developer or anything, but I just wanted to share my thoughts on what I did differently as opposed to my past efforts, and so I can learn from them and kind of share it with the community. Um, Here's some links to my website, my itch.io, where you can get the game. It's free. Twitch, where I stream games and then possibly stream game development. I haven't lately, but I may start doing that. And then to the GitHub repository, where you can get all the code for the game if you're interested in tearing it apart and seeing how it works and messing with it, changing it, whatnot. So this is a basically a clone of Robotron 2084, which is a game from 1984, I think. It's an arcade cabinet game. It's a top-down shooter, probably the earliest top-down shooter, but I don't know that for sure. It's one of the earliest, just pretty primitive, uh, just high score based game. Um, and the reason why I decided to do this is, first of all, it's just a game from my childhood I really like. Um, uh, but then also, I wanted to pick something that I could do that was a limited scope that I knew I could finish, and that would not just I wouldn't just keep adding features on and everything. So it has, specific enemy types, specific mechanics. It's not too complicated. At the basics, you just move around and shoot things. There's just different enemy behaviors, essentially, that make the game harder and different as you move through the waves and whatnot. Graphics are very basic, so it's not going to take forever to make something of the same graphical fidelity. Is no soundtrack. It's just a bunch of sound effects for everything, and the big thing here for me is this is the first like non game jam game I've made. Um, so the scope had to be defined before development began. I've like started a whole bunch of different projects before that all kind of flop. I lose interest. I stop working on them because I just keep adding stuff to them because I don't know where it's gonna end. I just start building a game, and I don't know like when it's gonna be done, when I should stop adding mechanics and just make some levels and release it. It just keeps going, and I eventually lose interest, go do something else because there's no end in sight. So that was something that really helped me this time actually finish a game. Kind of on that subject, for management, I use GitHub to manage my code. So if I wanted to work from different devices, I could push my code up to the cloud and then just pull it down from the other device and keep working on it from where I was at. So I could stay motivated to work on it, especially through the holidays. If I'm traveling, I can just take my laptop, pull the code down that I was working on at home, and keep going with it. Uh, I use Trello for tracking features. So every time I wanted to, I had features planned. I had them in a to do column here, and then I would move them to in progress as I worked on them and done. So that helped me complete like that helped me work in kind of short sprints. So I would say, okay, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to do this card, and I'm just going to do that card. And then when I'm done, I can reevaluate. Do I have enough time to work on another card, or should I go do something else? And that way, I was able to get work done in small increments. Know what work I needed to do. Know when I was done working, so I wasn't just kind of lost and shipping at this thing without a solid plan in place. So that helped a lot this time. Using that as a planning device. And then it also helped me see what is being accomplished as I go along. So I'm not just doing a bunch of work and then at the end of my work period, I don't know how much I really accomplished. I have a clear list of what I accomplished. I can feel good about it. It's done. Awesome. And then, especially when I had short work times available, I didn't have like all day to work on this thing. I had like 20 minutes here and there between work and my other obligations and gameplay, because I don't want to just make games and not have any time to play games. So I still kept playing games while I was making this, um, and kept my leisure time intact and did not let this take over all of my leisure time. And then I just gave this a slide all its own, because separating my workspaces really helped me. As I was starting to work on this, I got a new laptop, and I didn't install like any games on that laptop, and I just used it for developing games. So I would, uh, if I sat in front of my gaming PC, I would maybe work on it, but then I would usually end up playing games or doing something else. Um, but whenever I was sitting with that laptop away from my desk where my gaming PC was, like that was time to work on the game. Uh, and I found especially like going to coffee shops and stuff was very motivating, because like I was just there with the laptop, like I couldn't do anything else. Like, so it was game dev time. That helped me a lot. This was my first game I made not using like a fully featured engine. I've used Godot to make the last couple games for game jams, and it's nice because there's a lot of features that are built into it, that and they're well documented. It's a great engine. Not saying anything bad about Godot, but there's a whole lot of features there that you just don't use, and you're looking at the whole GUI with all the features there, and it's a bit hard to navigate and find just what you need, and it also bloats up the build size of the final game, obviously, because it's cramming in all of this other code that you're not necessarily going to use into the game, because it's just part of the engine that just goes into every game that's made with the engine. So uh, that was one thing. And then using the coding framework, I had the one pane of glass with only the features that I was working on. I didn't have all the other clutter. I didn't have to just change the two fields in Godot on the object, um, for what I wanted to change. Instead, I just had my code, and what was there on the editor is what I was working on. And then freedom to architect the game in Godot, and I've used Unity before, I've used GameMaker before to make games, and you're kind of tied down to the structure of how they want you to make them. It's like Godot has this scene system, which is fine. Once again, not saying anything bad about those engines, but when you use a framework, you are free to architect the game in the way that you want to architect it. So I don't have to use, a scene system. I can sort of build the objects and have them relate to each other how I want them to. And that, for me, it's a good thing. It can be a bad thing though if you don't know what you're doing, and you might need that structure initially to kind of learn how to build a game. But then it can become a huge hassle whenever you want to do something that doesn't really fit inside that structure. When I was working with Godot, a lot of times I was doing something and I was like, this doesn't really make sense to use the scene system to do this. Like this isn't how I really want these things to relate to one another, but I had to cram it into Godot's scene system because that's how the whole thing works. Like it all runs on that. You can't get around it. Um, and then just better in understanding of how the game engine is running. When you use something with a GUI like Godot, there's a lot of things that are happening that you just tick a box on the GUI, and it's doing something with code on the back end that's running in your game loop, but you don't really know exactly where it's running because it's all hidden behind there. There's some code in Godot too, and you can see where that part's running for the code you write, but there's a lot of stuff happening on the back end that you don't know exactly where it's at. On Love, like here I'll switch over to my code editor briefly. Like I know exactly the flow of the game engine. Like it's start to finish, there's different functions for like updating and drawing, and I know exactly where everything is happening. I know like when the player is moving over here, this is the code for like the determining the player's direction and moving the player. I know exactly where that's executing. It's this function right here, which is executed in the love update function down where I update the player. So like it's right here. So I know like if something funny is happening, I need to troubleshoot. I know if what is happening happens like here, if it happens after that or before that. Whereas using a more abstracted away, bigger engine, you don't get that granularity. So that was a big plus for me in moving to something like Love 2D because, and once again, if you're new to this and you're just starting out, or if you're primarily an artist and you're not a programmer, that can be a bad thing. So that's not a bad thing about Godot. Just for me, that was a huge plus for Love 2D moving to that. Okay, and then here's another big thing is when I started coding the game. First of all, I didn't start coding anything. Uh, I kind of had a shortcut here because this is a clone of a arcade game. So I had a starting point. I had a list of mechanics. When those mechanics were coded, it was going to be done and all that. So I had a very clear picture before I even wrote any code of what the game was going to do, like how it was going to work. Um, and then when I started writing the code, I did not do any art whatsoever until the game was playable. Like here's a screenshot over here of the game before I added any sprites to it. It's just primitives. I'm just drawing circles and squares with Love 2D's like graphical primitives. I'm not using any arts. I didn't make any pixel art. I just made the game work without that, and I got to make the game feel good to play before I even spent any time on making it look good. So I was able to, see a product coming together before I spent all that extra time into it. I think that's called prototyping for the actual game devs. Um, where you kind of make something that it just works, but you're not putting in all the polish and whatnot. So that's something I did this time that was uh, so much better than before, where I would like keep trying to add features, and then I would make the art for those features and art for those mechanics, art for that enemy, and then I would jump back and forth between, and it was just very slow feeling. Maybe not slow in total time worked, but it just like the game wasn't progressing as fast. And then I was not able to stay in like art mode or programming mode because I was constantly switching between the two. Um, but then cons of that here is you can get burned out doing one thing. So I can get burned out programming, and I'm like, oh, I'd really like to do some art. Um, Ultimately, having that split between team members would be optimal. I would like to work with an artist or something, so I wouldn't have to worry about splitting all the work or doing all the work myself. You could just work on the programming and have the artist start making the art for the other stuff as you went along. So that's something, if I can find people to work with, I'd like to do in the future. Okay. When it comes to the arts, I use pixel art because it's quote easier. It's not really easier. It's it's simpler. You are more restricted in what you can do with it. So if you just give me a sheet of paper and a pen, I can just keep adding detail to what I'm drawing over and over, and it can never really be complete. But with pixel art, like you only have that many pixels to represent it. So it's a good thing because to me it forces me to get the art done faster because there's only so much detail you can add, but then also it's harder to represent that detail. And that kind of comes to the next point where it's easier to do like cartoonish, silly, cute stuff over realistic looking stuff, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, it's just a style difference. But that is something I notice. I usually tend to make like cartoony, silly stuff because I'm using the pixel art style, and I can't really go for realism. I'm not really that skilled of an artist anyway, so even if I went for realism, I don't know if I'd be able to execute it. Um, and then once you practice pixel art for a while, you start to learn some of the tricks, like making a curve with pixel arts. Once you practice that for a while, you get better at that. And then when it comes to animation as well, you start to learn little tricks with animations, like just adding like a few pixels to one side of the tentacle, taking them off on the other side. So like here's my 3 frames where I just move things around just a few pixels, but then whenever you execute that, it looks really nice in the final animation. So just little tricks like that with pixel art that would probably be very very different in not using pixel art. Once again, I haven't made a game without pixel art, but I would assume that it would be a lot more difficult to get those animations set up quickly. You kind of have to redraw the whole arm of the thing every time instead of just like moving pixels around. Can be kind of nice. And I use Sprite, which is super popular. Everybody knows about Sprite. It's super awesome. I would recommend it to anybody who wants to get into pixel art. Um, so yeah, that's the tool I use. And in sound design, I have very little experience with sound design. I have a little bit of musical background, but I didn't have any music for this game, so that didn't come into play at all. Um, I ended up I just like posted on the Discord, hey, does anybody have recommendations? And people threw out a few of them, and this one looked the best, so I tried it first, and it was amazing. This chip tone thing. It's basically just like a little synth, and you can generate sounds. It's got like randomness built into it, so you can just like say, I want a shooty sound, a pew pew sound, and it'll give you one, and you can tweak it a little bit or do whatever and save the wave file. It was awesome. I really recommend this tool for anybody who wants to make sound effects for like a retro style game. Uh, Something I did do that was sort of unique is for sounds that were repeated frequently, like the shooting sound. Here, I'll run the game really quick so there's some context to this. So that shooting sound, what I did there was I took I took like a pentatonic scale, so I made like 5 notes of it, and then I cycled through those notes to sort of adds like a rhythmic effect to it. I thought that was cool. I thought that was something I did good. Um, Here, let me find the code for that because I think that's something I can do differently next time. Because what I did is I generated 5 different wave files. Let's see, where's something that uses that? That would be in the bullet code here. So yeah, here's like where I'm cycling through. So I spawn the bullets, and then I have this sound cycler variable that increments every time it goes through this loop, and then it goes through the different sound effects. I think I could actually do that with the Love 2D sound library, where I can change the sound with the library without defining these 5 different sound effects. Like here's all the sound effects in the load function. So you can see like I have 5 different booms, 5 different shoots, 5 different rescue, birth, all this stuff. I probably could have done one sound effect for each of these and then did it in code, which would have probably drastically reduced the file size of my build at the end. But once again, it's not that big of a game, so it doesn't really matter for a game this small. But if I made this again, I'd probably want to try to do the pitch change in code instead of having the different files. So that's something that I'd probably want to change. That's sound. So challenges I had to overcome here. Controller support was at first very simple when I was doing the buttons for the controllers, just the digital inputs, like it's on or it's off. But when it comes to control sticks, it's like it's a whole deal that I had to really learn how to do some. I had to relearn trigonometry, which I hadn't touched since high school, but I had to relearn like the sine, cosine, tangent, and how to calculate like angles. So, which you have to do a lot of that for game dev anyway, but a lot of it I could Google. But when it came to this, I could like I had to like figure out what directions they were going. Like, where's the code for this? Yeah, here's like all the joystick code, and there's an additional complication where if I just needed to get the direction that the joystick was pointing and normalize that direction, that would be one thing. That would be easy. But because I wanted to emulate the Robotron feel of having the 8 directions you shoot with the joystick, even though it's an analog joystick, which is like a full 360 degrees. I had to code it a little different, where I had to pick which of the 8 directions it would actually come out to here. And then you have your neutral as well, because like when you move the control stick on a controller, it increments this value that you get from it. It's like a float, which is like a decimal value between -1 and +1. So there's like a whole bunch of values in between there it can be. So I had to tweak the numbers to get it to work right, where the neutral felt right, like when you let go of the stick that it wouldn't shoot, and when you push the stick in a direction it shoots, and then getting it to feel right when you push, up left as opposed to up or straight left, and getting that to feel right took a lot of tweaking and a long time to just to get the joystick working. But it was worth it in the end, because next time I write a game that I want to use joystick on, I can just copy paste this code. I don't have to do that ever again. If I ever want to do that again, I've got that there. So that was a challenge. Let me go back to the slideshow. And then working with a less documented framework. Love 2D is there's plenty out there, but it's not like Godot. Godot, there's way more people using it. There's way more documentation out there. A lot more YouTube videos for Godot. There's not a lot of stuff out there on YouTube for Love 2D. There's a good amount. I think I took a Udemy class too beforehand. Uh, that was very good. And then just learning to work with everything in code with no graphical user interface for an engine was a challenge, but it was good. Once I learned it, it was easier to navigate around it. However, I have some things to learn when it comes to organizing the code itself. It's I probably should have separated out into a lot more files. Like my main here is like 1,000. It's like 1,100, 1,200 lines of code, and a lot of this should have been separated out more into these other files, which I started doing later. But a lot of the enemy code, like you see, I have the enforcer bullet and the missile is all separated out in the tank. But a lot of the other stuff I crammed into main, which I mean it works, but as I got towards the end of the project, especially coming back and looking at the code after I haven't worked on it, it's a lot harder to navigate that because I have this huge file and I have to scroll up and down and find where it's at. So that's something I need to do at the beginning is start separating things out into different files earlier, keep it better organized. But that's something I can do on the next game. Okay, so what could be better? I would have liked more time to balance the enemy counts on the levels. I would like to be able to have more people play the game other than myself. I didn't really have a lot of people to play test it. Um, but, since it's just a hobbyist sort of release, I didn't worry about that too much. Um, but I think the game gets kind of stale later on, and I could have changed how I did the enemy count increases to make it a little more interesting. Code could have been organized better. I kind of already touched on that in the last slide. Too much in the main file. Need to separate it out. I need to add support for other platforms because that's really a low effort thing these days. A lot of these frameworks have pretty easy instructions for how to build for Linux and build for Mac and even do in browser support, which ultimately just lets more people play your game, especially the browser support. Because people wouldn't even have to download it. They could just play it on itch.io and give me feedback. Probably a lot of people don't want to download a zip file, especially from somebody they don't really know. It could be malware or whatever, and run something on their computer. Not the best practice. And just more effort to market it, bring awareness. Like I wasn't trying to make any money here, but my marketing was pretty much limited to the Discord community I was interacting with and some Reddit posts that I did at the very end after I released it, which most of them got removed because Reddit's super picky. Like their communities, it's so hard to navigate their rules for posts, and I would like try to do it right, and it would get removed for this or that, and it's like, what the hell, man? But eventually, I got a post up, and I got like 18 upvotes, so that's my payout for this game is 18 Reddit upvotes, which is fine. Um, but yeah, so just more social media and all that. Obviously, if I wanted to make more of an effort there to get my game out. So plans for next game. I need to repeat what went well. I need to design and scope the game before I start coding, which I've already screwed up on. I already was like, oh, I want to make like a I want to make like an RPG grid-based like 2D RPG thing, and I started like writing the movement for it and stuff, and then I just like it just like lost interest really quick because I had no scope for it whatsoever. So I need to sit down and come up with what the game is going to be, and I need to come up with an ending point for where I'm going to stop adding features to the game. And that doesn't have to be the be all end all, it can change later, but I need to have that in place to break it up and start working on it before I even start writing any code because otherwise it's doomed to failure because I'm just gonna keep adding to it or I'm just gonna be lost as to what to work on next. I have to separate my mind into being wearing the different hats of being the programmer and being the designer and not try to be more than one at the same time and keep the scope small. I'm still only one guy, so unless I get other people to work with me, it's gonna have to be small. I can't make. I was trying to make a Metroidvania in Godot before I started working on Monstertron like a while back, and like it was just too big. Like I had this whole idea for like a world, and it was just like too much. Like there's no way I was ever gonna make that game by myself. Like because it would require me to maintain focus over way longer of a time than my brain can handle keeping focus on something. Uh, so unrealistic expectations of myself. And managing the project, working on features in small sprints, that was very helpful. Got to keep doing that. Um, and then getting something that I can play before touching art at all is huge. Um, no time spent in a sprite or anything. Maybe concept art, maybe, but probably not even that. Like, just get something that you can play and it needs to feel good to play without looking good at all, or it's not gonna be a good game. Uh, it's not it's not gonna be more fun to play if it looks better. Um, like to bring more people in, especially artists. If I could get an artist or even somebody who has a design idea for a game, and then I can just work on implementing the programming. I would like to do that instead of just working on my own, just because I can make something bigger. I can make something bigger without burning out on it and feeling like I have this big load of work. Because I would like to make something bigger, but I'm not going to be able to on my own. I just don't have the time for it, or the attention span to sustain like a long time of working on something like that. Um, Want to learn to use a level editor and make like a basic action adventure RPG. Once again, that genre can blow up into something massive that I will not finish. So I need to be careful with that, but I would like to make something, with a world. Uh, I do I DM for D&D and stuff, so I'd like to kind of take some of that stuff and make a game with it. And start building support way ahead of release. I need to make an itch page ahead of time. Uh, get contacts, people that would playtest it ahead of time, all that before I have before I start polishing, and all that. And then I'd like to get it on Steam just to learn that learn to navigate that system, even if it's free. Um, and just because that's what most people do. Most people don't go on itch and download games and figure out how to run the file correctly and all that to play their games. They go to Steam and they buy the game or download the game and they click the button to run the game. They don't want to like jump through a bunch of hoops to play my game. So I need to get it on a platform and learn to use that. So maybe someday I can sell a game or something on it. But so those are my goals for the next game. Yep. Okay. So that's it. How much time did I take up? That's pretty good. So yeah, this will go on YouTube, um, so I can share it. I don't know how many people actually showed up while I was doing that, but if anybody is here and has questions about it, wants me to explain any code or anything, ask away. Otherwise, I will be back for my casual gaming schedule, regularly scheduled uh, um, programming later tonight. I do stream on Twitch, just all sorts of games. But I think tonight I'm playing Tunic for my second session, playing through that game. Triple Dip, nice to see you. Thanks for coming. I super appreciate you showing up. Bees, how did I start coding for something like this? So my 9 to 5 day job, I work in IT, and I've been coding like as a hobbyist and doing game dev for a long time, but I've kind of been a programmer, on the side for a long time, and more recently I started coding for my job pretty much full time. So I've gotten a lot better at programming through that. So before that, I was using Godot and doing coding there. But really, you can just learn to code on your own. You don't have to take any classes for it. It's not too hard. If you can, programming is just telling a computer instructions on how to do something. And games are just drawings that move really fast based on the computer's directions. So if you could like make a flip book and like draw out on paper like how a game was supposed to work and like design like a tabletop game, then you can program a computer game. And programming is just learning to put those instructions in the computer and learning how the game loop works. But there's a ton of resources online. There's tons of communities, but yeah, I can link you to a bunch of stuff. For this specific library is Love 2D. Let me drag this over here. Love 2D is the library I use for this, which is it. You can't just jump in here without having any prior programming knowledge. You'll have to do some basic stuff. This uses a language called Lua. If you're brand new to programming, I would highly suggest Python. Python is very easy to learn. It has a lot of libraries out there for games and for other stuff to where you can use it for just about anything. It teaches you good like code formatting. Uh, so yeah, if you're brand new to code, I would start with Python, or if you just want to make games, honestly, I would start with Godot or Unity or one of those engines, like Godot. Here's the Godot page. Godot is free. There's Unity is another super popular one out there. Game Maker Studio. Those are all free at least for like if you're not making tons of money from your game, they're going to be free. Uh, so I would start there. I wouldn't start with the framework if you're new to coding. I would start with an engine like Godot or something or Unity and then go from there. If you really like the coding, then you can move on and get better at that and learn a framework. Okay, triple dip. Will you plan to go back to Godot eventually, or will you stick with Love? I will. So Godot is coming out with version 4 somewhat soon. You can see it right here on their page. They got betas out for 4, and I really want to try 4 out when it comes out because there's a lot of things about 3 I don't like that they say are getting fixed in 4. So I may try to go back to Godot and try out 4. But I really, really like having control over my own architecture with Love 2D and building this out how I want to. Like I get to put all the code where I want to, and I really like that. So, and also working with a level editor like Tiled or something. I don't know if that works with Godot or not, but it really depends. I want to try 4 when it comes out, but I really like Love 2D. I think I want to stick with it for a while. Next thing is B's asking. Oh, you're just saying, just yeah, just as a fascination. Yeah, me too. Like I highly doubt I will ever be able to make enough money doing game dev to replace my 9 to 5 job. Like it's something I want to keep doing as a hobby, and if it happens to ever work out, then that's super awesome. But I definitely don't expect it to ever turn into a full-time job. Um, oh yeah, Tim Conceivable, thanks for stopping by. Super appreciate it. Yeah, Python is a good starting language. Also, I think GameMaker is a good route because of drag and drop. Yeah, GameMaker is even simpler. And I think Unity as well has Godot might have this too, but a lot of these engines have drag and drop stuff where you don't even have to know how to write code. Like you can drag and drop logic blocks in and you can make a game without writing any code at all. I know Unity has that. GameMaker definitely has that. Godot maybe has something sort of like that. Um, yeah. Yeah, Tim, I'm Tim Conceivable. I am going to put this on YouTube. I'll put the Twitch highlights on my YouTube channel and I'll share it with the Discord once I have that up. I'll probably make another website post too. So yeah, I will make sure this gets saved for myself and for anybody else it might help. Oh, they're getting rid of visual scripting in version 4. Okay, so there you go. So if you want to do visual scripting, maybe try Game Maker or Unity. with which both are one of my favorite games of all time, Nuclear Throne. I was just playing it last night. Is made entirely in Game Maker. That's like one of my top like 5 games probably of all time. So, yeah, you can make a good game in anything. The tool is just what you prefer. It has no bearing on the quality of the game you're gonna make.